Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmassurupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Shruti smriti purananam alayam karunalayam namami bhagavat padam shankaram loka shankaram. So, to give a brief summary of what we have been discussing so far, at the very beginning I explained in brief the 12 systems of Indian philosophy, 6 systems called Astika Darsanas or theistic or orthodox, and 6 systems heterodox or unorthodox or Nastika Darsanas. And among the Astika Darsanas or theistic systems, there are 6. One is Vedanta, that is based on Uttaramimamsa. It is called Uttaramimamsa. Badarayana is the great teacher. Then Purvamimamsa, that is Jaimini is the teacher. Then Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Nyaya is Indian logic. That is the school of Gautama. And Kanada, that is Vaisheshika. And then Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya school belongs to Kapila, based on Kapila Sutras and Ishvara Krishna Sankhyakarika. And then Yoga, which is based on Patanjali. Then 6 non-orthodox or heterodox or Nastika Darsanas. The ancient Indian materialism called Charvaka Darsanas or Lokayatikas. And then Jaina philosophy. And then, of course, the 4 schools of later Buddhism, Sautrantika, Vaibhashika, Vijnanavada and Shunyavadas. 2 schools of idealism which belong to the Mahayana tradition, and 2 schools of realism which belong to the Hinayana tradition. So, of course, there are many other innumerable systems of Indian philosophy belonging to the Tantra tradition, and there are many other fringe groups also which we may discuss in course of time. Among the theistic systems, which are called theistic or Astika Darsanas, because they look upon Vedas as a primary source, Shabda Pramana it is called. They accept Vedas, and also they believe in certain fundamental cardinal principles of Hindu religion, like for example reincarnation, you may call it rebirth. Then some doctrines related to karma theory, the doctrine of law of karma, transmigration of the soul. Some of these ideas are also included, are part of the theistic tradition. So, and the atheistic, what you may call heterodox. In fact, it's not atheism. In Indian system, we need not call the Nastika Darsanas as atheistic, the way we use in the context of Abrahamic religious philosophies, because they do not accept Vedas as a primary source. They don't accept the Vedas. So they are called Nastika Darsanas. And now we are focusing mostly on Advaita Vedanta, because among the Uttaramimamsa traditions, among all these 6 schools of Astika Darsanas or theistic Darsanas, Vedanta philosophy is the only active and functional system of thought. In the sense, it is the only philosophical tradition which has a large following all over India and outside also, which has been revived, reinterpreted, taught and championed by great teachers, beginning with Shankaracharya and modern times, great monks, great teachers like Swami Vivekananda, and following Swami Vivekananda you find many other great teachers, both lay and also monastic teachers, like Swami Chinmayananda, who was champion of Vedanta, who came, actually he was following the footsteps of Swami Vivekananda and others. Dr. Radhakrishnan, another example, was a great Indian teacher, Indian philosopher. S.N. Dasgupta, Hiriyanna, T.M.P. Mahadevan, many others, they all were more or less champions of the Vedantic tradition. Because Vedanta includes many other systems also other than Advaita. Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, Nimbarka, Chaitanya system. They all belong to Vedantic tradition. So it is Vedanta philosophy that is now most popular. And among the different schools of Vedanta, it is Advaita Vedanta or non-dualism that is becoming very popular. It will already be very popular all over the world. And when I use the word the fundamental text, remember, I don't mean the books, because the books are so voluminous. Mostly I'm focusing on some of the fundamental statements in all these systems of philosophy, including the different schools of Buddhism, Jainism, and also materialism, Indian Charvaka system. So some of the fundamental texts, some of the fundamental statements from the primary text of these systems, that's what we are discussing today. And we are focusing on Advaita Vedanta today for the last two sessions. Dealing with Advaita Vedanta, as I mentioned earlier, some of the most fundamental teachings of Advaita Vedanta. For example, there is one absolute reality, Brahman. So, Brahma Satyam. Brahman is only absolute, eternal, unchanging reality. Everything else is only changing or relative or non-absolute, not unreal, but they are non-absolute. They are not absolute, but they are not absolutely unreal. They are, of course, not absolutely real. It's called non-absolute, relative, changing. The world is such a reality. The biggest question and the most debated question in Advaita Vedanta is as to the status of the world. What do you mean by saying this word Jagat Mithya? It has been subjected to many discussions, many controversies, including the great objections raised by the great Indian system builders like Ramanuja, Madhva, Vallabha, Nimbarka, many others, also many Nayayikas, Indian logicians, Mimamsakas. They all raised many questions, many objections on this fundamental doctrine. What do you mean by saying that this world is not absolutely real? It is only an apparent reality. It is mithya. So this word mithya has been defined by four great post-Shankarite philosophers who all actually followed Shankaracharya's tradition. They are Padmapada, who was a disciple of Shankaracharya. Then after him, Prakashatmayadi, and then after him, Chitsukhacharya, and then Anandabodha. So their books are, those who are interested, because this is being recorded, this can be used for academic studies by those who are interested in the traditional study of Vedanta philosophy. Padmapada, who was a disciple of Shankaracharya, wrote a book, Panchapatika, which is actually an interpretation of Shankaracharya's Brahmasutra Bhashya, and he defined mithya as sadasatta anadhigaranatvam va mithyatvam. Sat asat anadhigaranatvam. Or sat asat anadhigaranatva rupam or anirvachitvam mithyatvam. Indescribability, non-definability is mithya. It is, in fact, it is not a locus of either reality or unreality. This is the definition. We discussed this earlier. You can listen to the previous sessions. This is the first definition by Padmapadacharya, one of the most celebrated definitions. The second definition was by Prakashatmayadi, who defined in his book, the name of the book is Panchapadika Vivarana, an interpretation of Padmapada's book. He defined Pradipanno Badho Traikalika Nishedha Pradiyogitvam Mithyatvam. That means the world of multiplicity is eternally negated in what is perceived in that sense. I mean, it is eternally negated in the same locus where it is cognized. So, we already discussed. The third definition also is by the same author. Those who are interested, you can ask questions during interaction. Jnana nivartyatvam mithyatvam. When you get the real knowledge, what disappears? When you bring light, what disappears should be darkness. When you get real knowledge, if something runs away, disappears, that should be ignorance. Jnana nivartyatvam. That is also from Panchapadika Vivarana. Okay, so we discussed these three definitions elaborately. So, those who have, you can listen to the previous sessions, that will be helpful. The fourth definition, as I briefly mentioned in my last class, was by Chitsukacharya, who wrote the well-known book Tattwapratipika. In Tattwapratipika, he defines mithyatvam, illusoriness of the state of this world being defined as relative or apparent, means swasraya nishtha atyanta bhava pradyogitvam mithyatvam. I mean, the locus of which is equally the locus of its negation, eternal negation. So, swasraya nishtha means atyanta bhava pradyogitvam. Wherever it is found to be located, there itself is once for all negated in that sense. Or differently, an object which is invariable is absent where it seems to be present. So it is actually non-existent there, it is not existing there, but it seems to be present. Of course, this is being slightly modified by Madhusudana Saraswati. So you should remember Madhusudana Saraswati's name. It's a very famous name whenever you discuss Mithyatvam. This man was a great intellectual. He lived around 16th century. He mostly lived in Benares, where he went to study Advaita Vedanta, remained, and surprisingly, he was also a very great devotee. I shall say a few things that are very interesting about this man, Madhusudana Saraswati. So why are we referring to him? He wrote a well-known book. He wrote many books, including a great commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, Gudhartha Deepika, which I had occasion to teach. It's a very fairly big text which I had occasion to teach. But his most important book is Advaita Siddhi, which is one of the most difficult dialectical works in Indian philosophical tradition. In fact, during the post-Shankarite period, this is one of the remarkable works. So what he did? So I give the background. I already mentioned the four post-Shankarite Advaitins who defined Mithya. Padmapada, who wrote Panchapadika Vivarana, Padmapada, who wrote Panchapadika. Remember, Padmapada was a disciple of Shankaracharya. The name of the book is Panchapadika. And on Panchapadika, an interpretation, a commentary was written by Prakasatmedi. The name of the book is Panchapadika Vivarana. Then another philosopher came, Chitsukacharya, who wrote a well-known book, Tattwapratipika. And then later, Anandabodha, who wrote Nyaya Deepavali. Four of these great thinkers together defined, or rather gave 5 different definitions to Mithyatvam. Okay, now these definitions were taken up by a great dialectician belonging to Dvaita Sampradaya, Dvaita tradition. He was actually a follower of Madhvacharya. His name was Vyasatirtha or Vyasaraja. I discussed this earlier in my previous session. You can listen to that. So he logically refuted these definitions of Mithyatvam from so many different ways. He refuted from the Nayayika point of view. And he was an absolutely wonderful, very articulate dialectician and logician. So he refuted. So his book is known Nyaya Amritam, which created it was a big name and it created a big furor in Indian philosophical landscape. You can imagine this man writing this book, sitting somewhere in Karnataka. He was a guru, he was an abbot of a great ashrama, a great monastery. And he was, of course, he was a big man in the sense he was the Rajaguru of the greatest king of South India at that time. His name was Krishnadevaraya, well known as a great military tactician and military strategician. His guru was Vyasadeva. So, and also he was a great scholar. He wrote this book and he criticized Advaita, and he demolished many of the views of Advaita Vedanta, or he thought he demolished. As we are going to find out, he only thought he could not demolish. After him came this Madhusudana Saraswati, who was living in Benares, and he took up the task of defending this doctrine of Mithyatum, or this doctrine of world being considered to be only apparent or relative or non-absolute. And he took up all these objections raised by Vyasadeva and then demolished his arguments and defended Advaita Vedanta. So that was the uniqueness of this great person, Madhusudana Saraswati. Now, coming to this subject, the Madhusudana was also a great devotee, which we'll discuss in course of time. And Chitsukacharya's definition is the fourth one, that is Swasenishta Atyanta Bhava Pradyogitam Va Mithyatum. The fifth definition is by Ananda Bodha in his book Nyaya Deepavali. He says Sat Viviktatvam Va Mithyatum. In other words, what he said is, it should be different. Sat Viviktatvam means Mithyatum is different, something which is different, distinct, something else other than the reality. Reality is the character of being certified by pramana. If somebody argues that this world is absolutely real, it cannot stand any critical analysis. In that sense, it cannot be accepted. It is against pramana. I can just give a sample how Madhusudana takes up. This is only a very simple sample. You can see just a bird view of a few statements from the unique work Advaita Siddhi. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very difficult book. So as I mentioned, he is defending Ananda Bodha's definition of Mithyatum. Sat Viviktatum Mithyatum. Now Madhusudana says, what is falsity? What is Mithyatum? It is being different. It is different from what is real. Now he explains, Sattum cha pramana siddhatvam pramanatvam cha dosha asakrita jnana karanatvam. Pramana siddhatvam, so is defined by Madhusudana. So, and he says pramana siddhatvam means apadyattu vyapyam. So I will explain this. What he says is very simple. What is false should be different from the real. Now, the point is, anyone will agree with this. It's a simple statement child can say. But when it becomes a big statement and just a statement which is linked to a great philosophical doctrine of a metaphysical system, and when it is taken up by great dialecticians and argued about, then this simple statement has got a lot of meaning. Because if you cannot prove that this world is non-absolute, or this world is false in the ultimate sense, then If we cannot prove that, then Advaita cannot stand. You should remember what is the meaning of false and what is the meaning of real, what is the meaning of unreal in Vedanta. It is totally different from what you use in literature. So that's an important thing. In philosophy, many of these technical terms do have a lot of significance, loaded meaning. You see, a novelist or short story writer may write a word. The same word, when used by Kant or Hegel or Aquinas or Augustine, has got a different meaning. So a word used by short story writer or in your daily conversation may have a very simple elementary meaning. You look at the dictionary, Chambers, Webster's, Oxford Dictionary, you may get a meaning. But that is not the meaning when it is used as a part of an elaborate metaphysical system. So, real with a capital letter R, underline, maybe you can put in thick bold letter if you are typing. What is the meaning of real or reality? Something that remains the same in the past, present and future. Something which is perceived in the same way when you are sleeping in deep sleep, when you are dreaming, or when you are waking, when you are walking San Francisco streets. You perceive something, you perceive the same thing when you are sleeping in deep sleep or also when you are dreaming. So, in 3 states of human consciousness and in 3 states of time, past, present and future, it should remain the same. Also, it should not have any of the 6 changes. It's called Shat Vikara, 6 changes. Jayade, Asti, Vardhade, Viparinamade, Apakshiyade, Vinasyati. Something that comes into existence is a change from empirical non-existence to existence. Something comes into existence. It exists, it grows, it evolves, it decays, it disappears or dies out. These are 6 changes. The absolute reality, or capital letter, it should not have any of these changes. It should remain the same in the past, present and future. And it should be perceived the same manner in the 3 states of human consciousness. It is beyond, it is the eternal, changeless reality. Is there anything in this world which satisfies these conditions? No. Even this cosmos, whether you believe in Genesis, you believe in God's creation, or you believe in Darwin, you believe in evolution, whether you are an evolutionist or you are a creationist. Whether you are somebody like Richard Dawkins or you are somebody like a pious Christian praying in a church, you believe in creation. Whether you are an evolutionist, whether you are a creationist. You have to accept this world is changing. This cosmos is changing. This universe is changing. Billions of years, the world universe doesn't remain the same. So, it doesn't satisfy the conditions of the real capital letter R, the absolute reality. So, that absolute reality is only Brahman. And it never comes into existence. It never born because it is always there. It never dies because it is always there. It never grows or evolves or decays because it doesn't undergo any change. What is that? It is one divine spirit. An approximation of this idea you may get in the only Christian theologian that we can think of, that is Meister Eckhart, for which of course he had to pay a terrible price. That's a different question. So the point is, now, accept this Brahman or Atman, this divine reality that is present everywhere. Everything else in this world is only relatively real, not absolutely real. Now, you can imagine the simple word real, which in the Oxford Dictionary, Chambers Dictionary, means something. It becomes a big, like a Mount Everest in dialectical works. And that is what these great dialecticians are arguing about. So now you can imagine. So, what Madhusudana Saraswati's name is, he's an Acharya, of course. What Madhusudana Saraswati says is Sattvam cha pramana siddhatvam. What it means is Reality is the character of being certified by all tools of epistemology. Direct perception, inference, analogy, or maybe presumption, negation, use anything, comparison. You use or verbal testimony. Of course, I have described 4 more tools which are specific to certain fringe systems of Indian philosophy later. If you use any of these pramanas, we call pramana. Pramana means proof. The point is, the reality, the absolute reality is something which can be proved by all these pramanas or by any of these pramanas, by any of these epistemological tools. Now, the absolute reality of this world cannot be proved by any of these pramanas, by any of these proofs. You cannot prove that this world never undergoes any change because it undergoes change. So, it is only relative. Sattvam cha pramana siddhatvam. Pramanatvam cha dosha asakrita jnanakaranatvam. What it means is, what is pramana? Pramana is an instrumental, is an instrumental cause of a cognition without any inherent defect. Means some kind of a proof which is inherently accurate and complete. And not only that, it cannot be cancelled. What you actually can prove to be absolutely real can never be modified. It cannot be cancelled. Its reality cannot be cancelled, cannot be negated, cannot be questioned. It is abadhita vyapyam. Now, I am just giving just one simple example. Now, after this, we will come to another subject. Now, another very interesting subject. What is the concept of creation in Advaita Vedanta? This has been discussed elaborately in so many texts, so many important statements of Shankara's commentary, and also in the Upanishads, for example. Sadapo atapyada sadapastapta idam sarvamansrijada, etc. You can try. In the Upanishad there is a paragraph. But before going to that, I shall explain this in the words of Shankaracharya, the great commentator, the great original exponent of Advaita Vedanta. What is the status, or how do these non-dualist philosophers, how do they look upon this world? In other words, what is creation? What is this? What is the status? What is the ontological status of this world in Advaita Vedanta? So, there is a very famous paragraph which is frequently quoted. It's a very famous paragraph. It reads like a wonderful, exquisite poetry in Shankaracharya's commentary in the Mandukya Karika Bhashyam. It's a commentary on Mandukya Karika. So remember, it is Mandukya Upanishad is a very brief Upanishad, only 12 mantras, 12 statements, 12 slokas, 12 mantras. It has been elaborately explained and expanded and commented upon by another great teacher, Gaudapadacharya. Gaudapadacharya came almost 150 years before Shankaracharya. So he must have lived around 6th century or 5th century AD. So his name is Gaudapada, and he wrote a commentary in metrical form. It is called Karika. So he wrote Gaudapada Karika or Mandukya Karika, means a commentary in verse in Sanskrit, which is much larger, 225, much larger than Mandukya Upanishad, which is very brief, which has only 12 mantras. Now, Shankaracharya, who came 150 or 200 years later after Gaudapada, he wrote a commentary on both this Upanishad and also Gaudapada's commentary. So Shankaracharya's commentary on Gaudapada's commentary on Mandukya Upanishad. It's a commentary upon commentary. Because without Shankaracharya's commentary, Gaudapada's Karika, which is a commentary on Mandukya Upanishad, may not be very readable, may not even make much sense, because it is Shankaracharya who brought out the metaphysical, the philosophical dimension of this great work. So what do you mean by creation called Srishti? Called Srishti Chinta means Srishti Vichara means, the concept of creation in Advaita. Now, the concept of creation in Advaita is called magic. Now you may think it may surprise you. Suppose a magician comes and makes a show, and now you may go for a magic show. $100 you may pay for 1 hour play. Now, unless you are under the wrong notion, the illusion, or under the spell of the magician, you won't actually believe maybe for 1 hour on what the magician is demonstrating. So for that short time, what is actually false is believed to be real by you. That's why you pay $100. If a magician is playing something, and if you are not at all duped by him, then $100 is not worth paying actually. Because for 1 hour, you are deluded into thinking that what this man shows is real. Afterwards, you may dismiss the whole thing. Now, like that, this world itself is a magic. So, a magician you cannot dismiss, because afterwards you have to pay the money to him. So, he is standing there well dressed. He is real, but magic is not real. Like that, the creator, Brahman, is real. The creation is only an appearance. Now, this is a long paragraph. I shall recite from memory, or I shall quote, and I shall explain, because this is an important text which should be quoted. Vibhudir vistara ishwarasya srishti chintakaha manyante. Vibhuti vistara means expansion of this glory or the power of God. It is only it's a manipulation or expansion of God's power. Remember, in this context, the idea, God idea is taken. And again, we must remember, Shankaracharya doesn't deny the reality of a personal God. What he says is, there is a higher view, there is a more complete picture. It's again a total, it is absolutely false if somebody tells you that, oh, Advaitins do not believe in God. Absolute gibberish it is. Most of the Advaitins were great believers in God. They were going to temples. In fact, I mentioned on many occasions, the most profound, most moving devotion poetry in Sanskrit language were not written by Kalidasa, apparently the best known poet of Sanskrit literature. It was written by Shankaracharya. No less than 65 of the most exquisite poems were written by Shankaracharya, who conceived God as transcending forms, as transcending creatorship. So, who conceived of Ishvara as the creator of this world. So the point is, that is a discussion here. So he says, of course I shall explain this further, just to drive home this idea. Advaita doesn't deny devotion. Advaita doesn't rule out the reality of a personal God. Advaita goes beyond it. If you want any proof, Madhusudana's name I mentioned, the greatest Advaitin dialectician during the post-Shankarite times. Apparently, the author of Advaita Siddhi, which is certainly the most complicated, complex dialectical work in Vedantic tradition, written during the post-Shankarite times, because you cannot compare anything with Shankaracharya. So, after Shankaracharya's times. This Madhusudana Saraswati, he mentioned once, I am writing his Advaita Siddhi. a great dialectical work. Well, and he expounded this great work in the cutthroat language of pure logic. And then he says, but in my heart, my joy is to conceive Lord Krishna as a small little child playing on his flute. It's something like saying, Immanuel Kant, after writing Critique of Pure Reason, suppose he goes every Sunday for a confession to a church to pray, how it would look like. Kantians will never teach this book, because in Western philosophical traditions, unfortunately, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, an idealist should have nothing to do with anything in the real world. If A is right, B should be wrong. But Vedanta will tell you, if A is right, that doesn't mean that B should be wrong. B should be another approach, another way of approaching the reality. If A is right, okay, it doesn't mean that B, C, D should be all wrong. No, B also can be another approach, another way of looking at the reality. Now, here Madhusudana Saraswati's well-known verse is there, which he uses sometimes some of his versions as a Mangalacharana, as an invocation in his commentary on Gudhartha Deepika, which is a famous commentary on Bhagavad Gita. So he says, Vamsi Vibhushita Karat Navanidharabhat Pidambarad Arunabimba Phalad Adharoshtad Purnendu Sundaramukhat Aravinda Netrad Krishnat Param Kimabi Tattvam Aham Najani. So a cutthroat dialectician. And he says, in an emotion surcharged mood, this man says, but for me, I do not know of anything other than the little child Krishna, holding his flute with his hands, whose color is similar to that of a fresh rain cloud, wearing a beautiful yellow cloth, whose lips resemble a red bimb of fruit, whose face is as beautiful as the full moon, and whose eyes are like lotuses. So, the greatest dialectician, in real life, every day he was going to temple, he was praying, because it is possible. Because the transcendental doesn't deny the phenomenal. The transcendental transcends the phenomenal. The impersonal concept doesn't reject or deny the personal concept. It only goes beyond it. So the greatest dialectician was also an emotion surcharged devotee who was praying and going to his humble temple, a humble devotee, praying before the child Krishna. Some of you may have seen this Hare Krishna, great devotees, Hare Krishna, child Krishna is a flute, that was the most exquisite, the most endearing image of God for the greatest cutthroat dialectician. That's an interesting thing. So it means you may be a dialectician, you may emphasize on the impersonal, the transcendental aspect of God, but that doesn't mean that you should not pray to God. In your own personal life, for your heart, you pray to your God. At the same time, you understand that God idea is essentially an all-pervading, divine, transcendental spirit. That is the greatness of Vedanta. Shankaracharya doesn't deny the reality of the world. He only tells you that this world is not eternally real, it is not unchanging, it is only changing reality. Which is a common sense understanding. But he develops this into a unique philosophical doctrine. So anyway, I shall just read that paragraph from Gaudapada Karika, Bhashya, Shankaracharya's commentary on Gaudapada. He says, Vibhuti Vistara Ishwarasya Sushtidhi Sushti Chintakaha Manyende Nadu Paramartha Chintakanam Sushto Adara Ityarthaka Indro Mayavi Puraruvayate iti sutehi. Nahi mayavinam sutram akashe nikshipya tena sayudham aruhya chakshudgocharadam atitya yuddhena khandasya chinnam padidam punaruthidam cha pasyadam tatkritamaya sadata chindaya madhuro bhavati. Tathaiva ayam mayavinaha sutraprasarana samaha sushupta supnadi vikasaka tadarudha visamascha tarsama prajnadayasadihi sutradarudhabhyam anyaha paramartha mayavi saiva bhumishto maya channa adrishyamana eva sthidu yada tada turiyakyam paramartha tattum ataha paramartha chin sadachindayam eva adaro bhavati mumukshvanam aryanam na nishprayojanayam sushto adarit iti atha srishtichintakanam eva ede vikalpa ityaha swapnamaya surupa iti swapna surupa maya surupa iti. I shall explain this simple thing. So a magician comes to a king's court and a king asks him to give a show. So what he does is, so you know what he says, sutram akashe nikshipya tena sayudam aruhya chakshudgocharadam atitya. Suddenly he makes an announcement, this magician. Remember, this is something, an interesting prelude, in fact, some of the European travelers, not only European, even Battuta, is an Italian traveler who came to India, and Al-Biruni, an Arabian traveler, and also some Portuguese and English travelers have reported having seen this Indian rope trick. It's called Indian rope trick. I don't know whether this is possible or not, but anyway, that is an entirely different subject. We need not bother about the accuracy or the possibility of what we are reading now. But it is a description of what is known as the Indian rope trick. So a magician comes to a court, a king's court, and he makes a proclamation saying that I am called to go to heaven because a group of demons are invading the angels. So the angels are sending an SOS for me to go and assist them. He is a military help assistance. So the magician says he is fully armed. He makes the people believe that he is armed. Then he throws a rope into the sky. Then people see him climbing through this rope, Indian rope trick, He is seen to be climbing this rope, and then he disappears. After some time, people hear a lot of fighting going on, clash of steel, clash of swords, arms, weapons, and then a lot of dead bodies falling to the ground. Then, and people believe terrible things are happening. The magician is dead, and people are being killed in the heavens. After some time, everything gone. Then people look around, they find the magician is standing there smiling. In modern time, he may be asking for his check. So the point is, now, when the magic is going on, the onlookers may think magic is real. But here, Mayavi or magician is real, but Maya or magic is unreal. Magic is only an appearance. Because there was no magic before the magician arrived in the king's court. There will be no magic after some time, because when the delusion is gone, there is nothing happening. So the point is, this world is like a magic. God is real, the creator. That is why, Vibhudi Vistaraha Ishwarasya Srishti. So here, Ishvara, the creator, is real. The creation is only an illusion. The creation is only an appearance. Now, what does it mean? If we can think of this world, this universe, as a magic going on for the last several billions of years, then it's only the difference in degrees, not difference in kind. So this is a classical interpretation of this world. So what is wrong if somebody says this world is unreal or this world is only relative. Remember, doesn't deny the reality of this world absolutely. Only the absolute reality is denied, the relative reality is accepted. If I mentioned this earlier, what is absolutely unreal cannot be denied. You don't bother to deny what is absolutely unreal. You cannot deny, because denial is possible only if there is a possibility of somebody not understanding its true nature. You have to really know world is not real. What is obviously unreal, there is no need to make a statement that it is unreal. What is obviously real, you cannot really deny its reality. And you don't have to make a statement about its reality. So I mentioned this earlier, Shankaracharya's great statement, prasaktasya ka prastavaha, prasaktasya ko nishedhaha, aprasaktasya ka prastavaha, aprasaktasya ko nishedhaha. What is obvious, common sense experience, you do not deny it, and you don't have to affirm it. You don't have to make a statement about it. What is absolutely unreal, that also you don't have to deny, but you cannot certainly you cannot affirm it. But this world of names and forms and changes and different colors, different manifestations, people may wrongly assume or think that this world is absolutely real. So Vedanta says this world is not absolutely real, it is only relatively real. And that's why Vedantists again and again repeat the statement, so long as you have not reached this highest state of spiritual enlightenment, it's called Jivan Mukta, the liberated one. So long as that is your status, you have to live in this world as if the world is real. Then you have to do spiritual practices, you have to do karma yoga, you should do your duties properly. And then, in course of time, when you get spiritually enlightened, then the unreality of the world, or rather the relativity of this world, will become a matter of your own inner experience. It is not a philosophical construct, it is not an intellectual idea, it is something that occurs to you as a fact of experience. Of course, this concept has been criticized many times. There are many texts. I can give you some example. For example, you'll be surprised. Strong language was used by many Indian dialecticians and Indian philosophers when they criticized this doctrine of Mithyatvam. One well-known statement, it comes from Vedanta Desika. Vedanta Desika Venkatanatha. Vedanta Desika was the commentator of Ramanujacharya's important works. Ramanujacharya was the teacher, exponent of Visishtadvaita. It's called qualified non-dualism, which believed that the highest concept of God is the totality of all good qualities. So if you can think of God as the totality of all that is auspicious, that's wonderful. But then what do you make out of the reality of the unpleasant? Because there are many unpleasant things in this world. Then you have to invent a Satan or devil who is all the time fighting with that God. The God is the totality of all the good auspicious qualities. Satan or devil is the totality of all that is inauspicious. So that will make the world a battleground. God and devil. God's followers and devil's followers all the time fighting. So Advaita doesn't accept this view. So Advaita will tell you, Advaita doesn't accept the doctrine of the devil, rather, or the evil doctrine of error. I mean, the so-called evil is only a matter of ignorance, a matter of not proper understanding. But this was not properly understood even by many Indian thinkers. So I can quote one strong statement by Vedanta Desika. Remember, they were all very saintly people, they were very pious people. But in the language, they didn't spare anyone. So you can find Prachanna Bauddha Vishaye Parido Yatadhvam. So he wrote a well-known book, Shadadushani, means 100 defects of non-dualism. 100 defects of non-dualism, Shadadushani. Now remember, in opposition to this, another Vedanta Advaitin dialectician wrote Shadabhushani, 100 auspicious qualities of Advaita. The point is, so this kind of intellectual warfare, they were physically, they were not fighting, they were very pious. The vegetarian, cutthroat vegetarian, went to temples every day, did the puja, worship, the prayer, and vibhudis, and all that they did. But when they write, they write this strong language. He says, we should always fight with non-dualists because they are all Buddhists walking incognito. That's an interesting thing. They are Buddhist walking incognito. There is a philosophical connection in this. Many non-Buddhists misunderstood one important system of Buddhist idealism. It's called Vijnanavada Yogachara. It is a kind of a much more exalted kind of subjective idealism than Berkeley. So, very often, so in other words, this the Yogachara or the Vijnanavadins, according to one school, there are many schools, according to one school, nothing exists. Subjects and objects. There is no objective reality, there is no subjective reality. It is some kind of a doctrine of, not Shunyavada, but some kind of a all-denying, world-denying, philosophically very unsatisfactory doctrine. That is how they interpreted Buddhism. Not Buddhist, but non-Buddhist, trying to find faults with the Yogacara system of later Buddhism. It's called in Sautrantika, in Vaibhashika, Vijnanavadin, Shunyavadin. These are 4 schools of Buddhism, which I referred to earlier. 2 schools were realists by Sautrantika and Vaibhashika, and 2 schools were idealists, Vijnanavada and Shunyavada. Nagarjuna was the exponent of Shunyavada, and then Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, many of those were Dignaga, they were the exponents of Yogacara system, or each another name was Vijnanavada. So, this man, this Vedanta Desika, he says, Prachanna Bauddha Vishaye Parido Yatattvam, means we should always fight with these pseudo-Buddhists. So, because of this mithyatvam, the ideal of mithya, or the concept of mithyatvam, the world is only an apparent reality. Advaitins were criticized by the Vishishtadvaitins or the followers of Ramanuja, like Vedanta Desika, as pseudo-Buddhists. They are just like Vijnanavadins or Yogacara philosophers. Anyway, we will discuss some of the related subjects of Advaita in the next session. Now you are most welcome to ask questions. Namaskar. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Most welcome with questions.
Namaste, Swamiji. I sent a video of the rope trip for the benefit of everybody.
Excuse me?
Rope magician.
If you put it on the chat, I haven't seen it, but maybe you emailed it to the other group.
I put it on the WhatsApp channel.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Swami?
Yeah.
What is Gaudapada's,
Yeah.
is he considered a very advanced expression of Advaita. I know that Shankara wrote, I think it was the Mandukya Karika.
Mandukya and Gaudapada Karika, same.
But is the Mandukya Karika that Gaudapada wrote, that considered a very advanced expression of Advaita, or is that not so highly regarded?
Gaudapada gave only the conclusions of Advaita. In other words, among the pre-Shankarite Advaitins, among the Advaitins who lived before Shankaracharya's times, Gaudapada is the greatest name. The other works which include Advaita philosophy, very elaborately, Yoga Vasishtha, Adhyatma Ramayana, and there are just a few books which contain Advaitic ideas prominently. But Gaudapada's Karika, Mandukya Karika or Gaudapada Karika, it is considered to be one of the important books, maybe the most important book belonging to pre-Shankarite period of Advaita Vedanta. What he did, Alata Shanti Prakaranam is the last chapter. For your information, I gave some 60-70 lectures on the Mandukya Karika. Is available, audio is available in the website. So that was in 2012, 13, 14, that's around that time. So anyway, Gaudapada in a way gave only conclusions. His doctrine of non-origination of the world, Ajadavada or Ajativada, non-origination. It is, in that sense, it is not a complete philosophy. It gives only the conclusion, the last statement, from the highest Advaitic point of view. He doesn't give any elaborate metaphysics or epistemology or anything. What Shankara did, he built a huge edifice, then also he installed an elevator. So people can reach the top of the building, or the top of the hill if you like, because he built an elaborate system. Shankaracharya's famous devotional poems addressed to different deities, then his introductory works on Vedanta, Vivekachudamani, Tattwabodha, Atmabodha and so on, then his Prakarana Granthas, which are higher introductory works, then his commentaries. So it all looks like a huge edifice. In other words, he built a big university, but he built kindergartens, primary schools, small colleges, and eventually you can reach university. Gaudapada made only the statement that comes from a university. So non-origination is the last word in Advaita evolution. But Shankaracharya takes you there. Gaudapada begins there and ends there. That's the thing. In Gaudapada's work, he refers to 34 different schools of Indian philosophical systems which were prevailing during his time, roughly around 5th or 6th century. Different deity, different followers, different, what in Sanskrit called sampradayas, different denominations following different philosophical systems. So Gaudapada is the most prominent name belonging to pre-Shankarite period of Advaita Vedanta. That's all. Yeah. It's only commentary on Mandukya Upanishad. Mandukya Upanishad has only 12 mantras. So he expanded it. That's all. And Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on all these. That's all. Yeah.
Yogi, you're next.
Yeah, most welcome.
Yogi, we can't hear you. Please go ahead. All right, while we're waiting for Yogi, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you can.
Sorry about that. Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah.
About the non-origination of the world, In Bhagavad Gita, we hear this Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidyana.
Vidanapi bhavapi. Yeah.
Bhavapi. How do Advaitins comment on that when the verse clearly says they're both Prakriti and Purusha are beginningless?
Yeah, that in Gita, there are many references to Sankhya philosophy. And Sankhya's believe in dualism, two eternal realities, Prakriti and Purusha. Purusha is effulgent but inactive. Prakriti is not effulgent but active, the source of the entire evolution. So, this is a reference to the Sankhya system slowly evolving towards Vedanta. It has nothing to do with the doctrine of non-origination. Gaudapada, as I mentioned, what he gave was the conclusion of Advaita. When you reach the highest spiritual experience of being identified with Brahman, the only reality, then the whole creation is perceived to be like waves emerging in an ocean. Really speaking, in an ocean, there may be waves and foams and drops of water, but you cannot say they exist independent of the ocean. They are part of the ocean. But then at the same time, for the time being, you may say that this wave may be 30 feet wave. It is different from the calm, quiet water. But really, are the waves different? No, because the same water, for some time, in some ways, appears to be 30 feet tall, and you may wrongly assume it is different from the water that from which it is come. But really, it's water only. So there are no waves, we can say. In what sense? Because there is only water. No waves, you can say. But you can also say there are waves because 30 feet manifestation of water emerging, you can see. But from a higher point of view, you can say they are not real waves. Only water for some time appears differently. That's all. Again, this is the ultimate experience. And that's what Gaudapada says, non-origination. The world has not come into existence. It is only a matter of the highest spiritual, mystical experience. It is not a philosophy. Only Gaudapada, he focuses only on this aspect called Ajadavada. Ajadavada is a matter of Advaitic experience at the highest level. But Gaudapada was the first great teacher who articulated this doctrine. That's why his book has become very famous, called Ajadavada. What you mentioned, the Gita, it is only an analytical attempt to explain. That is not the highest philosophy indicated in that particular verse.
When Shankara wrote the commentary on Bhagavad Gita, how did he defend this verse?
Yeah, it's again, at the relative level, these things may appear to be real, but in Purusha, in its reality, is all-encompassing reality. Purishete iti Purushaha, Purnatvat Purushaha. That is Shankaracharya means. Purusha is nothing but that supreme reality that is encased, that is lying within this body mind complex. That is Purishete iti Purushaha. Purnatva, it is Purna means it is eternal, it transcends the three levels of consciousness, waking, dream and deep sleep, and also it transcends the triple dimensions of time, past, present and future. It is Purna, it is perfect, complete, eternal, unchanging. In that sense, Purusha is. But Prakriti, the word Prakriti used only in the context of Sankhya system. So remember, Sankhya philosophy can be found in many verses of Gita, but not as its conclusion, in its analytical aspect. You can find Mimamsa in Gita, But Secret Lord Krishna criticizes Mimamsa ritualism, Yakshidasya, Modishi, Jnana Vimohidaha. So also you can find in Gita criticism of dualism. So dualism mentioned in Gita is the dualism of Sankhya, not of Madhvacharya, because there was no Madhva. Madhvacharya came only in 12th century AD and Shankara lived in 8th century. So in the Advaitic text of Shankaracharya or before in the Gita and others, dualism implies Sankhya system. Sankhya is the main dualistic school of philosophy before Madhvacharya emerged. And Prakriti, Purusha, these are two eternal realities in the Sankhya philosophy.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. Before AJ's hand, which I see up, there was a prior chat question on the Zoom chat.
Yeah.
None on the YouTube, but on the Zoom chat there's a question requesting that you say something about the relationship of Advaita and the Hare Krishna movement.
Yeah. No, I was giving an example. Madhusudana Saraswati was not part of this movement or anything. You were the opposite. But the point is, this great Advaitin was such a great devotee because devotion is not against Advaita. Advaita philosophy accommodates devotional ideas. This is a very important thing. In fact, there are many great statements in Shankaracharya's commentary which are highly Advaitic and also devotional. See, Ishvara Anugraha Deva Pumsam Advaita Vasana Mahabhaya Paritrana Ditranam Eva Jayade. Now, this is what it says is, by the grace of God only, you get a taste for Advaita. You get a taste for non-dualistic thinking only by the grace of God. That is what. Now, this is found in some editions of Khandana Khanda Khadya, which is actually, it is an extreme kind of polemical, dialectical work written by Sri Harsha. An extreme kind of, much more extreme than even Madhusudana, polemical work. So, and it is cutthroat Advaiti. He criticizes the Nayayika's interpretation of Nayayika criticism of Advaita, but he says one gets a taste, an interest in Advaita only by the grace of God. And the Shankaracharya says, in Shankaracharya's tradition, in one of the prasthanas, this Appaya Dikshita, Athapi Anugraha Deva Tarunendu Shikhamanehi Advaita Vasana Pumsam Avibhavadi Tat Yatha means. So according to Appaya Dikshita, you see, only by the grace of God one can get a taste and interest in Advaita. So where do you stand? That's why you have to remember, Advaita is an all-accommodating, embracing spiritual philosophy. Remember, in real experience, all these great Advaitin writers, they get up in the morning, they follow their rituals, go to the temple, they do their puja, rituals, everything, sitting in front of the deity, and then they write a book which says that God is beyond deities, God is beyond temples. So this Madhusudana lived in Benares, Kashi, close to Vishwanath Mandir, the famous temple, Madhusudana. And he wrote all these, and there are many stories about him, about his daily visit to Vishwanath Mandir, the temple. And he was writing a book which tells you that God is beyond temples. Doesn't deny the association of the divine with temples and churches, but it transcends temples and churches and books. It doesn't contradict, not reject or deny, but going beyond. See, you can see in Christian mystical tradition also. The great Christian mystics, after all, the church came into blows with them only because they believe they can directly communicate with the reality of Jesus or God without the unavoidable association of the hierarchy. That's all. A mystic is one who feels the presence of the divine all the time, everywhere, in all his activities, in all life situations. And he doesn't deny or reject the confession or the prayer, what goes on in liturgy in the church. But he says spirituality can even go beyond that. That's all. Doesn't reject, but can go beyond that. Can transcend, need not reject. That's the idea. Advaita accepts everything. Doesn't reject anything. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience, AJ.
Yeah.
It's your turn.
Thank you, Swami, for the lecture and for the opportunity to ask a question here. So I first learned of Vivekachudamani through these recent lectures, Swami, and I have a question from there. Is this the right forum and time to ask, or should I ask that?
No, you can ask, yeah.
Okay, so I was looking at the English translation and I got stuck at the second one, which a translation that I came across, and it reads as, for all beings, a human birth is difficult to obtain. More so as a male body, rarer than it is Brahman, so on. So is this an anachronism, mistranslation?
I should thank you for this question. This question will emerge modern times, So, the Durlabham Trayamegaidat Devanugrahayeduvam Manishuttam Mukshuttam Mahapurusha Samseka, etc. So, okay, now, these three gifts from God. One is being born as a human being, and being born as a spiritual aspirant, and also association with the great spiritual teachers. Now remember...
Swami, sorry to interrupt there. There was a point about being born as male and also a Brahmin, so that's the thing I'm kind of confused about.
Now remember, in some of the traditional books, you find these words. That may be partly because of the social conditions prevailing at that time. Shankaracharya is not making a statement that this should be only for the male or should be only Brahmins, not at all. Maybe in those times, in those social conditions it was used. So remember, Swami Vivekananda defined education as the manifestation of perfection already in man. And religion is the manifestation of divinity already in man. So, in 19th century English, man included entire humanity. That you have to remember, Nara, the word Nara is used, Nru means Nara is used in Sanskrit, which is masculine gender. But it means the entire species, humanity. That's the meaning here. This should be clearly understood. We are talking about 19th century English language. If you read the writings of the lectures of Disraeli and Gladstone, the great British politicians, prime ministers, they were using the word man. Swami Vivekananda's man-making religion. Education is we need a man-making education. Man-make means give confidence. It doesn't man to the exclusion of the feminine. It makes humanity. That was how language was used in those days. That applies to many of these traditions. And also you should remember, two of the greatest philosophers who are equally great of Brihadaranya Upanishad, maybe the entire Vedic world. One was a lady, and who was she? Gargi. The other was Yajnavalkya. Two great philosophers of Yajurveda tradition, Shukla Yajurveda tradition. You can see any number of ladies in ancient times. And remember, can you imagine a lady coming in front of Plato, arguing with Plato? Can you imagine? Can you imagine a lady coming to Aquinas or Augustine? Augustine 5th century, Augustine much later. Can you imagine? But we are talking about 3rd millennium BC. And in Shukla Yajurveda, Brihadaranya Upanishad, Gargi, who was much more learned than Janaka, the big emperor. And in his court, thousands of scholars have come, all these Brahmins, male Brahmin, etc. She was called to speak. And then you know what happens? She charges ahead and challenges the greatest philosopher of those times, Yajnavalkya, who was Janaka's guru. And a friendly but very, very, very prolonged arguments take place. So we should always remember. So when you look at a work, you have to you look at the work from the perspective of those times. This is one of the tools in hermeneutics. When you interpret scriptures and books, you have to keep in mind the social conditions, the language that was prevalent during those days. You have to take all of this into consideration. It's important to remember. This is a simple idea, simple common sense by interpreting any ancient works.
Thank you, Swami. So that clarifies
thank you.
general path.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. That clarifies the general path, but for the Brahmin put part, is that also the same interpretation based on the time?
The word uses dvija. Yeah. Actually, that could be maybe in those days they were the only people who cared for this because of social conditions. But it cannot be that cannot be true, because in the Chandogya and Brihadaranya Upanishad, many of the great teachers are Kshatriya kings who are teaching Brahmins. You can imagine. Ashwapati and Ajatashatru. These are all great names in Chandogya tradition. Janaka in Brihadaranya Upanishad, in the Shukla Yajurveda tradition. So, it cannot be true. And not only that, in ancient India, during Vedic times, women were also initiated into Gayatri Mantra and Vedic studies. There are many sources like that. Many of these social divisiveness may be later developments. If you look at an ancient book with the prism of our own social conditions, it may not be doing justice to the great teachers or the great teachings. It's an important thing to remember.
Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah.
I see that Jana is unmuted. Is that to ask a question?
Yeah, most of it.
Namaskar, Swamiji.
Yeah, namaskar.
I just also wanted to add about the clarification for a Brahmin that the question arose, that only in the later period the classification became more caste-based, but till then it wasn't caste-based, right? A Brahmin was somebody who was learned. He could be of any caste.
Well, thank you for the question. You're most welcome. But so I have two important points to mention. I shall certainly answer this question. I'm very happy to answer this question. But I would prefer that we limit our conversation as far as possible only to philosophical ideas or the text we discuss. Because we need not take up subjects which can land us in some kind of a sociological or cultural or historical, sometimes maybe slightly controversial subject. So as far as possible, you can confine your discussion, your questions to ideas that we discuss, because mostly we are dealing with some ancient text, which is there are many of our friends who are watching this and looking forward towards discussions of philosophy, all these things. There are many platforms where the subject that you refer to are discussed, and they're very important subjects. I thank you for this question. But still, there are many platforms where these subjects are being discussed. So let us confine our discussion to philosophy, texts and things like that. But anyway, come to the subject. So,
Thank you.
okay, no, I shall come to the subject. In the Gita, Chadurvarnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagashaka tasya kartaram abhimam vidhi akartaram abhiyam. So Lord Krishna says the four divisions, social divisions you may cast, were all, they're a matter of our own cultural evolution, our own spiritual evolution, based on our characteristics, our temperament, and what we do, or the type of actions that we perform. People who are refined, who are spiritually more cultivated, and people who do good and great things, they may be exalted to the position of maybe some higher positions based on their qualities, temperaments, characteristics, and actions. This is very important, remember. So those who are more of a sattvic type will be Brahmins, sattvic Rajoguna. Rajoguna dominating over Sattoguna will be Kshatriyas. And sometimes those who have got Rajoguna and Tamoguna will be Vaishyas. Those who have the predominance of Tamoguna, Ashudra. This is now. So Guna means our temperaments, characteristics, behavior patterns, our own refinement, spiritual refinement. So it was mostly a division based on where we stand in terms of our own spiritual or cultural evolution or refinement. This is important to remember. Historically speaking, you find casteism became a birth-based, rigid institution, an inflexible social convention only around 12th century or 13th century AD. That's a view of many sociologists. Again, I don't want this discussion to prolong because there are many views, and there is a little chance and possibility of our sliding into some undesirable channels of discussion and thought currents, the subject you mentioned. But thank you for your interest in this subjects, in the fundamental foundational text of Indian philosophy. Let us confine our discussion as far as possible to philosophical ideas that's within our scope of discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Maharaj,
Yeah.
you made reference to the robust intellectual debate, the descent to Advaita from other promulgators of other schools, and the the wild situation as they would take each other on, happily so. And I wanted to ask whether or not some of the characterizations of Advaitins as masquerading Buddhists, as pseudo-Buddhists. So was some of that possibly due to a lack of familiarity with the texts? In some cases, perhaps they would get access to more information and revise their objections. Are there examples that come to your mind where they would take a closer look and then say, no, sorry, we were confused about this? Or did the battle just rage on?
Yeah. Of course, during the period between 9th century and 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, many rigidly dialectical and polemical works were written defending Advaita, and some of them, like the Sikhasa who wrote Khandana Khandakadi and others, they went too far towards conceptualizing Advaita into some kind of a world-negating, life-negating idealism. That must have provoked a challenge from the opposite side. No, we want devotion. We want to worship our God. We want our temples. We don't care for your extreme kind of idealistic interpretation of God. No, we want our temples. So as a result of this, Ramanuja came, Vedanta Desika came, Madhvacharya came in Madhva tradition, Vaditirtha, Jayatirtha, and Vyasatirtha and others came. So you find very often when somebody pushes Advaita too far, often going far away from Shankaracharya's own main pristine tradition, because Shankaracharya himself was a great devotee who wrote so many devotional poems, and he's the author of the greatest and most moving devotional poetry in Sanskrit language. He installed temples. He also elaborated how we should perform worship, but then behind every worship there is one transcendental, all-pervading divine reality. So this idea was always there. Now, this was forgotten, and instead Advaita was sometimes interpreted too far into some kind of a world-negating, life-negating idealism. So that must have prompted a criticism from the opposite side, like Vedanta Desika. So he is not criticizing Shankaracharya here. So he actually says these people are Prachanna Buddha, means pseudo-Buddhist. Actually, Buddhists also were not this kind of God, this kind of life-negating philosophers. But among Buddhists also, especially there is Pravritti Vijnanavada. You know, Vijnanavada Yogachara had two levels of evolution. One is Ale Vijnanavada and Pravritti Vijnanavada. At some point, some of the Buddhist writers in India, not outside India, remember, Buddhism developed along two channels, two different ways in India and outside India. In India, many of the highly educated, traditional, scholarly people, they went to Buddhist, they became Buddhist monks. They began to write very deep metaphysical, dialectical works on Buddhism, which never really happened outside India, really speaking, you know. Buddha actually taught in the simple language the common people, Prakrit, and his teachings were mostly codified into Pali script, Tripitaka, Buddha, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka. So that was, and he passed away 480 BC. And a few years later, about 50 years later, there was a first Buddhist council. It was held in Bihar, and they codified, they wrote down all this into Tripitaka. So the point is, later on, from 2nd century BC onwards up to about 6th, 7th century AD, a number of highly dialectical works were written on Buddhism, which also pushed Buddhism into an extreme corner. So that again created a lot of opposition from the other side. So anyway, the beauty and the charm of it, as I mentioned earlier, those who wrote this extreme kind of dialectical works on Advaita were also very humble devotees, praying to their deity, doing their puja every day. So this is an important thing. So whether Sighasha wrote Khandana Khandakadya or Appaya Dikshita or Madhusudana, any of them. So the point is, Advaita actually accommodates all other thoughts. It doesn't deny or reject anything. So Siddhanta Vyavasthasu Dvaitino Nischita Dridam Parasparam Viruddhyante Taihi Ayamna Viruddhyate. It comes in Mandukya Karika Gaudavada Karika. So he says, Dvaitins fight among themselves. It's not Dvaitins of Madhva tradition. Dvaitin here means Sankhyas, or those who believe in divisiveness, those who believe things are, those who don't accept unity behind diversity, those who believe in kind of eternal diversity. So they fight among themselves. Advaita has no quarrel with anyone. Atma Ananyatva, because the same Atman is present in everyone, everywhere, in that sense. Okay, so thank you for these questions. Most welcome, all of you. I shall conclude now. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. We have some very important announcements. Please listen. There will be no lectures or classes this summer except for the Sunday evening class. So please remember, this class will continue. Our Sunday 6 o'clock classes, online classes on the foundational text of Indian philosophy, this will continue online throughout the summer recess. But our old temple Bhagavad Gita classes, that's 7:30, we conduct the Gita classes every Friday 7:30. That will be cancelled during the summer recess beginning tomorrow, and also our Sunday lectures in the new temple. But this class will always remain. Please remember, all of you can remember, this particular class that we are holding at 6 o'clock every Sunday on the foundational text of Indian philosophy. This will continue online throughout. Okay. Now we have a Guru Purnima celebration. Those who are from nearby places, please remember, we have a Guru Purnima celebration Saturday, July 16th. Saturday, July 16th, 10 a.m. And also we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Ramakrishna Mission. So there will be a special lecture on Saturday, July 16th. This will be around 12 o'clock by Swami Chaitananandaji. Swami Chaitananandaji of St. Louis Center will give a lecture on the Ramakrishna Mission 125th anniversary as part of our celebration of the 225th anniversary of the foundation of Ramakrishna Mission. And we will begin with puja at 10 a.m. and then there will be this lecture. Please remember, 16th July, 10 a.m. Guru Purnima celebration in the new temple, 2323 Bellevue Street, San Francisco. Another announcement, please keep in mind, that is, we have our annual Labor Day retreat, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, September the 3rd, 4th and 5th. We will have 1 hour lecture from 10 to 11 and then half an hour interaction. The subject is the role of spiritual values in modern education. So this will be held in this hall in the old temple. In San Francisco, Filbert and Webster Street Junction. But remember, you can get the latest information and updates from our website, savedanta.org. We'll give you the latest information. Please refer to savedanta.org. Please remember, this lecture at 6 p.m. every Sunday on Indian philosophy will continue throughout. You are most welcome. Okay, thank you. Namaskar. Namaskar.
Recording stopped.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you everyone. Thank you.